Hello. In this video, I'm going to be giving my short book review on Voices from Exile by Victor Montejo, as well as going over the issues that the Guatemalan people had to go through from the treatment of the Guatemalan government, the military, as well as the trek that many Guatemalan refugees had to go from Guatemala to the state of Chiapas to seek refuge, along with their treatment from the Mexican immigration officials. But I think it's important to highlight how this all came about. Why was there such a catastrophic civil war? The treatment of the Mayan people, the Guatemalan people. Why was it so bad? So I think it's important to start at square one, and that is in 1871, where an elite U.S. businessman with the name of Henry Meigs had started a railroad company, and he signed deals with the government of Costa Rica to establish a railroad that would connect the port, a northern port of Costa Rica, to the capital, San Jose. And what happened was the government was not able to pay off its debt to the company. So in order for there to be some sufficient payments, the Costa Rican government gave 800,000 acres of land to the company. So what did the company do with this land is they used a lot of it for bananas, fruits, to feed its workers. And then the idea came around of using a lot of these fruits to sell to Americans back, in the United States. And this eventually moved on to other countries as well, such as Jamaica and Colombia, and eventually Guatemala. Shortly after Meigs had passed away, he had gave this fortune in his company to his nephew, who was Miner Keith. Keith eventually had some issues with the company, and eventually had met with a few other elite businessmen, and they put their money and all of their power together to create the United Fruit Company. This eventually came out to be an $11.23 million company, a very powerful company at that time. Not only was this company powerful, it also had connections with U.S. government officials and elite shareholders. They also owned in 1930, 3.5 million acres of land in Central America, the single largest landowner in Guatemala. And before we get to that, as to why they became such a powerful landowner, it's important to see how this influence came about from this company. And that is in 1899, the president, Manuel Jose Estrada, wanted to increase the export economy of Guatemala. And how do you do that? By working on railroads, many forms of transportation, which Guatemala lacked at the time or did not have as many. So the president, without any talk from any legislator or judiciary, had struck a deal with the company. Now, what did the company get? The United Fruit Company, I mean. The company got tax exemptions, land grants, and control of all railroads. Not only that, what also happened was that the company got many acres of land from the poorer people of Guatemala. This created a lot of animosity over time. Not just the company, but also rich elites of Guatemala as well. And at this point, I'd like to maybe point out some pros and some cons of the company. And that is, if people do consider these pros, would be that the company managed to build infrastructure, provided jobs for Guatemalans that worked there, and also built schools for the workers, the children of these workers. And of course, the cons were that the company owned a majority of the land, was free, got these tax exemptions, and did nothing with a lot of this land. So as time went on, dictator after dictator went by and establishing closer relations with this company. Why did they establish close relations? It's simple. It's because they got benefits from this. They received many benefits in terms of money, many other things as well. So from 1931 to 1944, President Jorge Ubicio had managed to bring a lot of more issues to the country as the Great Depression had started. And what were these issues? Well, he started a law that required all men that didn't own land to at least work 100 days of hard labor, forced labor. Many indigenous people, the Mayans, were forced to build railroads and work on these railroads for many long hours. So again, this created even more animosity. And not only that, but the president gave about 490,000 acres of land to the United Fruit Company. This also displaced farmers. Again, more tax exemptions, just creating more issues for the Guatemalan people, specifically the middle and poorer communities. So in 1944, a large revolution happened where two men, one by the name of Francisco Arena and Jacobo Arbenz, had started to eventually remove Ubiso from power. And once this happened, life in Guatemala seemed to become much better. Arena became the president in Guatemala and managed to establish the first free elections in the country's history. Not only that, but this new constitution that was created granted civil rights never seen before in the country. Unfortunately, the U.S. saw this as a form of communism because they believed that their beloved United Fruit Company was going to become, going to be under attack. So many foreign real estates are confiscated and given to peasants. Many estates. Landowners are provided to give housing to these peasants, new schools, hospitals. So there are a lot of complaints from the elites because they had to give up so much land. And in 1951, Jacobo Arbenz became president, and he created Decree 900, in which a law was passed in 1952 called the Agrarian Reform Law. And essentially what happened was large portions of land holdings were given to poor Guatemalans. This improved the lives of the poor community of Guatemala greatly. And of course, the negative side to this was that not only did the elites complain of this, but the United Fruit Company finally decided that it was time to connect with the government of the United States and see this as it was, as a threat of communism. So what did the United States government do? They helped fund a coup, a military coup, to remove Arbenz from power, in which they managed to insert a dictator by the name of Castillo, or Carlos Armas. My apologies. And essentially what Carlos Armas did was he reversed the decree. All land was restored to the United Fruit Company as well as to the rich elite. This then created much more animosity and more problems between the lower classes of Guatemala and the upper elite. And then soon, around the 1960s, many left-wing soldiers went against the government as well. And many of these soldiers eventually moved into poorer territories of Guatemala, and the Civil War started, which pitted the poor Guatemalan people against the government. Issues continued to get worse as President Rios Montt, as well as Lucas Garcia, came into power, where they inserted death squads. People went up missing. Many people were murdered, killed, raped. Villages were leveled. And I think this is where we'll start to get into the book, Voices from Exile. The book starts out with Victor discussing the anthropology of what is a Mayan person, what makes him so distinct, from other indigenous people, discussing the culture, the language, and many other aspects. The history is also touched upon of this book in regards to, colonization in their eyes is really not that long ago. If you look at the Mayan history, indigenous history goes back thousands of years, where colonization started only 500 something years ago. The book takes into many accounts of the Mayan people, and those accounts were the treatment of the Guatemalan government, how they viewed the indigenous people, how they viewed guerrillas in their eyes. And I would like to just say one thing, and that is, I'm not sure how my government, the United States government, can support such atrocities in the names of getting rid of communism. And that is that when the United Fruit Company had complained to the U.S. government about so much of their land being given to peasants, the U.S. government started working even more closely with the Guatemalan military in terms of how to kill, how to kidnap people, and all these other terrible things. And roughly about, the estimates say 200,000 people were dead from this war. And as terrible as that sounds, I don't believe that our government is really shown in this light as really supporting this dictatorship as much as it should. And what do I mean by that is that Ronald Reagan had even considered Rios Montt, who was largely responsible for a lot of the genocide of the Mayan people, as almost a friend of his, a close ally, if you will. So going back to the book, in the very early chapters, it's one atrocity after the other. You really learn a lot from the Mayans' point of view. And that is that the government was ruthless to these people, eliminating them one by one. Again, as I said, people went missing. Many of the Guatemalans that were suspected as being communist or supporting guerrillas were taken away and killed. And not much was done to stop this until very later. So as the chapters went on, the author started to discuss one particular person who had joined the military. His reasons were because he wanted to, he needed the money to support his family. And the stories that he tells about what he saw and what exactly happened to so many of these poor people is, in my opinion, very hard, maybe for some to read and listen about. Just the ruthlessness, the racism, the discrimination against Mayan people. The Guatemalan military was essentially taught to hate indigenous people, almost view them as demons, not human. Very similar to the colonial era. And again, this particular person described many of the situations that happened to those suspected of being communist, where they were taken into the military barracks and beaten, often killed, and then their bodies were thrown into the river, never to be seen again. So the chapters move on to discuss the transition of leaving and moving into Mexico, essentially learning of their status as refugees. And this part of their life gets much more complicated. And it's not so much the adjustment of living in the state of Chiapas, which is the southern part of Mexico, right next to Guatemala. But it's the fact that the Guatemalan military still hunted them down. The book discusses somewhat briefly that the Guatemalan military, especially this elite group of soldiers called the Kabyles, went over to the Mexican border even to kill some of these suspected communists, as they say. But obviously in reality, they were refugees just wanting to seek a better life and escape from the dictatorship. It was very difficult for these Guatemalan refugees to live in this life because they also became persecuted from immigration officials, questioning them, suspecting them of being agents of communism, of the guerrillas. Many were sent back to Guatemala, which was even more terrible. So you really start to develop a very strong feeling, even passion for these refugees and what they went through during the Civil War. And in my opinion, I truly believe that the American government should issue a stronger apology to what happened and our support, because the American government has a very large hand in the support of training the Guatemalan soldiers to act in this way as well. Towards the end of the book, they discuss the way of cultural assimilation, how the strategy of survival was very, very difficult because many of the Guatemalan refugees became so accustomed to the Mexican, as they say, Ladino way of life that they were soon assimilated into it. It was just a life that many of them believed that they needed to accept. Not all of them, of course, but many just became absorbed into this different, alien culture to them. Towards the end, many of the Mayan, Guatemalan refugees were able to return back after so many years of hardship. And even then, it was very difficult because they were given so little resources when they returned. So my thoughts on this book was, please, if you want to understand the mistreatment, the essential, extermination that the Guatemalan government and the military had, pursued in the 1980s and 90s and even before, then please read this book. You'll develop a very strong understanding as to why these issues were happening, why the American government is not innocent in this, essentially slapping these poor people as communists, and they believe that they're justified. So again, I strongly recommend this book to my friends and supporters. And thank you so much for everything that you've done in terms of telling people about my videos and the work that I've tried to do to just get the message across about Indigenous people and many other topics as well. So if you like this video, please like and please share with others. And I hope you all have a really great day.